The afternoon sun was blazing over my ranch when the familiar crunch of gravel under tires caught my attention. Two sheriff's cruisers crawled up my private drive, lights strobing like they were responding to some major crisis in a town that didn't have any. From my kitchen window, I spotted Brenda Kensington planted at my gate, arms crossed tight. Wearing that self-satisfied smirk she'd perfected ever since she crowned herself HOA president 6 months back, she practically bounced on her toes, signaling the deputies forward like she was supervising traffic at the county fair. I set down my coffee mug and stepped out onto the porch, adjusting my belt out of habit. The lead deputy was young, so young, he looked like he barely had time to memorize his badge. Number, and he approached with his hand casually resting near his holster. His partner lingered by the cruiser, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. Brenda followed behind them as if she were leading a grand parade, chin so high it was a miracle she didn't topple over. "Sir, we received a report of trespassing and illegal occupation of this property," the rookie announced, forcing his voice to sound stern. I watched Brenda's face brighten like Christmas morning. That's when I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my federal credentials. Sunlight flashed across the badge as I flipped it open. U.S. Marshal, retired after 25 years with a clearance level that would make their heads spin. The deputy's expression snapped from firm to horrified in 2 seconds. Brenda's triumphant grin melted faster than butter on asphalt. "Marshal Caldwell," the deputy stuttered, straightening instantly. "Sir, I'm sorry. We were informed you were a squatter. Let me back up and explain how I ended up with the neighborhood's most notorious busybody trying to evict me from my own ranch. After retiring from the Marshal Service, I bought this 40-acre spread precisely because it sat completely outside any HOA boundaries. The land had been zoned agricultural since 1942, grandfathered long before Cedar Ridge Estates even existed. I wanted space, quiet, and room for my horses. What I got instead was Brenda Kensington. The first letter showed up 2 weeks after I moved in. Typed on HOA letterhead she'd clearly crafted herself, complete with cheesy clip art of a house and a white picket fence. "Dear resident," it began, "your property has been found in violation of Cedar Ridge Estates community standards." The violations she listed were downright ridiculous. Unapproved fence color, my fence was natural cedar. Excessive outdoor structures, she meant my century-old barn. And the best one? Maintaining livestock in a residential neighborhood. I walked over that evening, trying to be polite, letter in hand. She opened the door, dressed in what I could only describe as business casual for someone who didn't actually have a job. "Ms. Kensington," I said calmly, "there must be a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of your HOA." She looked at me like I just explained gravity incorrectly. "All properties in this area fall under our governance," she said, in a tone people use when speaking to toddlers. "We enforce standards for the entire community. Ma'am, my deed predates your subdivision by 60 years. I'm zoned agricultural. Your HOA has zero authority here." I showed her my documents. She barely glanced at them. "We'll see about that," she said, and slammed the door in my face. The harassment went downhill fast from there. She started snapping photos from the road with a zoom lens, like she was gathering evidence for some documentary. I caught her standing at my fence line with a clipboard, scribbling notes as if she were conducting an official inspection. Violation notices started arriving daily. Too many vehicles, I had 2 trucks and a tractor. Improper landscaping, I was growing hay. Noise violations, my rooster crowed at dawn, like roosters do. One morning, I found her actually on my property, measuring the distance between my chicken coop and her precious subdivision. "You're trespassing," I told her evenly. She spun around, clutching her measuring tape like it was a weapon. "These chickens are too close to residential homes," she declared indignantly. "County code requires 500 feet. County code requires 50, which they exceed by 300. And you're still trespassing." I pointed at the giant no. trespassing sign she had blatantly ignored. "I'm conducting official HOA business." She huffed, puffing up like one of my roosters. "On property outside your jurisdiction," I reminded her. "Leave now, or I'll have you removed." The irony of that sentence wouldn't fully hit until later. She stomped away, but not before promising she'd take this to the highest levels. I assumed she meant the HOA board or maybe the county. I underestimated her obsession with imaginary authority. Everything boiled over 3 weeks later. I was repairing a section of fence when I heard someone wrestling with my locked gate. Brenda had climbed over it somehow and was storming toward me with a manila folder raised like she was carrying a royal decree. Her face was flushed from rage and the athletic effort she wasn't used to. "Mr. Caldwell," she said between heavy breaths, "I have here a cease and desist order requiring you to vacate this property immediately." I set down my hammer and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Let me see that." The document was hilariously amateur, clearly something she'd downloaded from a template website. It referenced HOA bylaws that didn't apply and county laws she had completely misread. "Brenda, this isn't legal. You can't evict me from my own land, especially when you have no authority here." Her face darkened to an alarming shade of red. "I am the president of the Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association," she said grandly. "My authority extends to all properties that affect our community values." "No, it doesn't. And you're trespassing again. Leave now." "I'm not leaving until you agree to comply with our regulations," she declared, folding her arms like she thought that alone made her official. "Then you leave me no choice," I replied. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." She actually laughed, full, dismissive, triumphant. "Go ahead. Call them. Tell them Brenda Kensington sent you. They know who I am. I've worked with code enforcement for years." She was practically glowing with pride. "Actually, no, I'll save you the trouble." She whipped out her own phone and dialed 911 right in front of me. I stood there in disbelief as she told the operator that a hostile squatter had taken over land next to Cedar Ridge Estates and was refusing to leave. She gave my address, described me as dangerous, and ended her report with trembling, fake concern. "Please hurry. I'm frightened for my safety." Which brings us right back to the moment where everything came crashing down. The deputies were standing in my driveway, trying to piece together the disaster she'd created. Brenda's dramatic report of a dangerous squatter had just collided headfirst with the truth. She'd called the police on a former federal marshal with 25 years of service, including 10 spent working side by side with their own sheriff's department on joint operations. "Marshal Caldwell," the senior deputy said respectfully as he approached, stepping out from the second cruiser. "I apologize for the confusion." He turned to Brenda. "Miss Kensington, you reported a trespasser, but it appears you are the one on private property without permission. Check your records," Brenda demanded, her voice cracking with desperation. "This land belongs to the HOA expansion project." I pulled up the files on my phone. Property deed, survey maps, zoning documents, laying everything out clearly. "And for the record," I added, "Ms. Kensington has repeatedly trespassed on my land despite written and verbal warnings to stop." The deputies exchanged looks. The senior turned back to her. "Ma'am, did you climb over a locked gate to enter this property?" "I have authority here," she insisted, but the conviction was draining from her voice. "No, ma'am, you don't. And filing a false police report is a misdemeanor. Calling someone a dangerous squatter when you know they're the legal owner, that's a serious offense." Brenda opened and closed her mouth helplessly, like a fish gasping for air. "But the HOA rules clearly state the HOA rules don't apply to property outside the HOA." The deputy cut in. He turned to me. "Marshal Caldwell, would you like to press trespassing charges?" I hesitated. For a moment, I considered letting it go, being the bigger man. But then I remembered the letters, the harassment, the stalking, the endless attempts to push me off my own land. "Yes," I said, "I would." And I'll be filing for a restraining order. The senior deputy nodded and faced Brenda. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. You cannot be serious. She sputtered. I'm the HOA president. I know the sheriff personally. It's the same sheriff who worked with Marshal Caldwell for a decade. The deputy asked calmly, Ma'am, hands behind your back. As they cuffed her and read her rights, Brenda kept ranting about authority and community standards, her voice breaking with disbelief. News spread quickly. Small towns are like that. By evening, half the neighborhood knew their HOA president had been arrested for trespassing on a federal marshal's ranch. The next HOA board meeting broke attendance records. I was invited to speak about property rights and, more importantly, the limits of HOA power. Brenda sat in the back, out on bail, her expression frozen in humiliation. When homeowners began calling for her resignation, she jumped to defend herself. I was protecting our property values, she cried. That ranch is an eyesore. Stock. Old structures. It drags down the entire neighborhood. That's when I dropped the bomb. Actually, I said, I'd been wondering why Ms. Kensington was so determined to run me off. So I did a little digging. I pulled a folder from my bag. Turns out, there's a proposal in the HOA records for an equestrian amenity expansion. Something that would require acquiring adjacent agricultural land. I paused. My land. The room erupted in gasps. Board member Tom Harrison grabbed the folder and flipped through it. This is dated 3 months ago, he said, scanning more pages. Then he looked up sharply. Brenda, you've been trying to push Marshal Caldwell off his property so you could seize it for some HOA horse facility. It's not stealing, she protested, voice cracking into a shrill pitch. It's a strategic acquisition for community improvement. It's fraud. Someone shouted from the back. Abuse of power. Another added. The vote was unanimous. Brenda was immediately removed from the board and barred from holding any HOA office again. But her ordeal was just beginning. The district attorney reviewed the evidence and charged her with criminal trespass, filing a false police report, harassment, and attempted fraud. 6 months later, at her sentencing, the judge did not mince words. Ms. Kensington, he said sternly, you abused your position to harass a lawful property owner, wasted police resources, and attempted what amounts to theft by intimidation. This court sentences you to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and fines totaling $15,000. Brenda's face drained of color. 15,000, she choked out. But I was trying to improve the community. You were attempting to steal someone's land, the judge replied. Court is adjourned. As the bailiff escorted her out, Brenda turned and stared at me one last time. Shock, disbelief, and the crushing realization that her empire of HOA power had finally collapsed, with her as the one paying the price.